Hi class, it's Bill Berry here with a video on views. We'll probably do a couple on views and then one or two maybe on functions. We're sort of getting to the last topics in our class, and we want to talk about views, which are a very convenient, very useful, and broadly used thing in database world. So let's jump in and look at what we'll do. So we're going to certainly practice some of that. If you're in class with me, we'll certainly do some practice on that, but we'll spend some time on what are views and what are their limitations. And then again, we'll do a quick survey of functions and kind of see what SQL offers us to make sure that we have a good idea. If we ever need these things, we'll have a little idea that they exist. So what about views? What is a view first? Well, the greatest definition, the best definition is this, and that is a view is really just a way to take a select statement that you write and store it as a database object. You can use a select statement in all its glory. Everything you can do in a select, everything we've already studied and you know, great, there it is. But it's stored as a database object. So the user doesn't have to go back and retype it, and they don't have to go and find an old copy and copy paste it, right? They can simply use the view, which is a very convenient thing for end users. You can think of it as a virtual table with only the columns from the specific tables, right? So it's sort of a simplified virtual table. You can also use more than one table, right? If you use regular tables, these are called base tables. You can draw data from base tables. You can also draw data from other views. Now that's an interesting one because views are easier to change than tables, so it's an interesting question. If you use a view that depends on another view, what happens if the first view changes in some manner? It might break the second view, right? So that's an interesting thing. One other thing that's important to know is that it does not store data. A view is not a snapshot, right? It doesn't take a snapshot of data at that particular moment. It's a select statement. So every time you run it, you're getting fresh data, right? You don't have to worry about that. Another thing to note is that views sometimes can be used for insert, update, and delete. Just like you could use tables, right? Sometimes you can use a view as if it's a table in this regard. But there are pretty significant limitations, and so we'll see most views in the end are not actually updatable. Another thing that's very commonly used in terms of views is you can do simplifications. Remember that in the real world, sometimes tables can have many columns. There can be 100 columns in some tables. So often you don't need all those tables all the time, right? Very often users need a certain set of data most of the time. So a view can take a complex table and pare it down to a simpler view so that users can get just the key data that they need, and they will appreciate that. Also, even though we may or may not have studied it at this point, there are cases where administrators can set column level privilege in a database, so they can actually choose whether you get to see every single column in a table. There may be certain columns that are kind of limited, right? For instance, if there's a social security number in an HR database, there aren't many people who actually get to see that, right? That's pretty limited. So while a view does not override any kind of privilege, it could be used to sort of pare that down. So you sort of focus on the columns that you need and you just omit that one, and then it's not that big a deal. So the other thing is that you can use it as a table when it comes to select. So you can select star from a view, sure, but you can also select certain columns, you can put wheres, you can join to it. Everything you can do with a normal table, you can do with a view when it comes to selecting. So the end user is kind of unaware of the fact that it's a view, or even if they know it's a view, they kind of think that a view is much like a table, right? They're not completely sure how they're different when it comes to that use. All right, so let's talk about when do you use it, when do you not. When to use a view, it's perfect when you have complex joins, right? We know that joins can be tricky. You've got to get joins together with adding the right table at the right time. You've got to find a join condition. Joins are just difficult. You don't want end users to have to remember that stuff or go and copy and paste complex queries and try to edit certain pieces or update them. It's just easier if you have a view, right? Because all that joining is taken away. It's all hidden underneath the view. So that's pretty good. You can also, anytime your select is complex, it doesn't have to be a join. You might have column aliases or some things that have to be typed in specific orders. Again, end users don't want to have to deal with that stuff. So views can really, really take that level of difficulty away from them and just present them with a simple view. One thing to note though is that views are typically created broadly, right? They shouldn't be that specific. You should make them general, and then remember that the user can always add a where clause, right? They can always do further filtering on your view. So I would say in general, think about them being broad tools that help with very basic business scenarios. If you need to do it for something specific, like make it about one client, remember to make the name of the view that specific too, so that the user is clear on the fact that it focuses on your major client or whatever that might be. Let's take a quick peek at then how do you create it syntactically? What's the syntax for this? We've seen some really difficult syntax during our time, but this is not one of those, right? Creating a view is super simple. You really just have to say create view and then give it a name, right? Create view and give it a name. Now, you can use this or replace optionally, because often if you're creating these things, you probably keep around this SQL. And if you want to recreate the view, it's easier to just replace it with a new definition, right? It's easier than going and doing the alter syntax, which exists, but why? So create or replace view is very common. You can then optionally provide a column list. And if so, all you're doing is giving different names, right? If you don't like the column names in the tables, you can give different names here. Now, we already know how to do that in a select, right? We know how to rename our output columns using as. So you can do that as well. But if you'd like to, you can use this syntax. You put parentheses and you list the columns, very much like what we do in an insert statement, say. Now then, you just put the keyword as and you write a select statement, right? Now, when you create a view, I would recommend you don't create the view until you've got this part ironed out, right? So make sure that you have taken your select statement and proven that it works. So get that all working with all of its complexities, and then put this create view around it. We'll come back to check option later. So really it's create view as and then put a select statement, right? So it could not be a lot easier in terms of the syntax. You can also destroy them with the same syntax that you would expect given how other database objects are manipulated. So drop view and then give it a name, just like drop database, drop table, right? All of these things work pretty much the same way when you have a named object in a database. So creating a view is pretty simple. Let's do one example together using our pet adoption. So let's say that we wanted to create a view. Let me bring up our notepad window so we can edit while we are looking. All right, so here we have our customer pets, and let's say that we wanted to write a view called pets and owners, and it's going to show all of the pets, right? All in capital letters to me indicates that's going to be an outer join, right? And we want the name of their owners and adoption dates, etc. So how do we do that? What's the syntax? Well, we know we're going to do this part, create or replace view, and then we're going to give it a name, pets and owners, right? Now, what do we do next? Well, we know we're going to give a column list if we want, but look at these column names. Here we have customer name, adoption date, and pet name. I think those are kind of okay, right? I don't know that I can do better. And don't try to be so friendly that you start putting spaces in things, because users have to manipulate them. So for instance, I think this would be a bad thing to do. We're going to do pet name. I wouldn't do this, right? Because then users are forever, when they do queries and wheres and all these things, they're going to have to put that space and the apostrophes, and they are not going to like you because of that. So I don't think we can do better. I'm going to leave that out. I'm just going to say as. Then we know we're going to write a select statement. Now here we're just going to do a normal old join, right? We're going to select the pet name, comma, cus name, comma, adoption date. I'm going to pull that from pet. I'm going to do a left join. Since I'm mentioning pet first, right, that becomes the left table. So I'm going to do left join to customer pet. And the good old using clause, pet ID is our common column name. The PK, FK relationship is based on that. And then we left join to customer as well. And I'm going to be using cust ID. right? That's the PK-FK relationship between those two tables. So again, this part, it's just a normal select statement, right? Just a normal select statement. So how do we make sure it works? Well, let's jump over to MySQL Workbench and let's try it. Okay, so we are in Workbench. Let's go and run this thing, right? So I'm going to run it, and we're going to see down here, create or replace view, 0 rows affected. Great. But now if I refresh my schema view, navigator here, I see that I have my pets and owners view, and in fact, if I expand that, look at that. Column names just as if those are normal table column names, right? Of course, there's no primary key, there's other things like that, but still, here's, looks kind of like a table, right? Now, how do we see if it works? Well, let's do a select. Select star from, then we're going to call that pets and owners. Notice it kind of flattened our nice capitalization, but oh well, sometimes it does that with database objects, right? Okay, now you'll see here's all our data, right? So just like if we had done the select. But remember, this can be treated pretty much like a table. So I can say, for instance, where month, adoption date is equal to 11, let's say, right? So I can add a where clause, I can rerun that, and then I just get the adoption dates that are in November, etc., right? So you can treat it, for most respects, like it is a normal query, right? So that's pretty cool, right? Pretty cool stuff. So that brings us to a pretty good stopping point, I think, for views. We have more to talk about, but this video is already getting long enough, so I think let's pause, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about the intricacies, right? This is the simple stuff that we've covered here. We'll talk about some of the intricacies and the details of that in the next video. So thanks for watching this one, though.